stars come to play. He's the biggest of them all. Step back, 4-3. Phoenix forced a turnover at halfway. Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Clock at 10. Adams the off balance.
Oh my goodness.
Hello and welcome back to the Basketball Fix podcast. My name is Ryan, I'm the host of today's show, and I have with me Josh and Jeremy. We're going to dive into the Cairns Taipans today, looking at a little bit quickly back at their NBL24 season and then looking ahead to NBL25. But first off, Josh, Jez, how are you boys?
How we going, Ryan? Obviously looking forward to continuing on these NBL25 previews that we've started, and excited about today's one because there's going to be a lot to talk about with the Cairns Taipans.
Yes, mate, going really well. Has been a lot of action since last week in the NBL and the Boomers. There's been a lot of basketball, so it's exciting and slowly warming up for NBL 25.
Very exciting to say the least. Now, I just want to do a quick recap on the 2024 season for Cairns. Josh, what are your main takeaways from the Cairns Taipans from last season?
Yeah, it was an up and down season, I guess, for the Cairns Taipans. And, you probably look back at their rotations as well that Adam Ford, I guess, really tried to establish. And maybe the word might not be established, might be a lack of establishment, I guess, within his rotations. We saw the big man merry-go-round there with Sam Wardenberg, Josh Roberts, and Sam Menenga. And then, there was a couple of questionable things late in the season that obviously happened with Tajir McCall and Adam Ford as well. I guess a little bit of an ego thing and some arguments as well about how the team was going, where probably Taj saw himself in NBL 25. And yeah, it was a really up and down season, I think. They never really looked like a team that could contend, and they didn't really look like a team that would make the finals. They were just somewhere in between, I guess, a non-finals team and a bottom of the ladder team as well. And, that's why they sit 8th in the NBL 24 ladder.
Jez, do you have anything kind of to add to Josh's analysis of NBL 24 for these guys?
I think he just is really spot on with that forward rotation. It seemed like that really unsettled them. It should have been, like, if you look at it, they had some really good guys on their roster there playing up front. And if they could have just found a way to work all of them in and play to their strengths, they could have been, a bigger challenger and maybe threatened to at least make the playoffs. But it just felt like that rotation just pulled them apart a little bit. And then obviously with a little bit of, off-court drama going on, then that's obviously going to hurt their chances a lot. So hopefully this year, as they have rebuilt a little bit, brought in some new guys, which we're obviously going to talk about, hopefully they find that balance and can push towards maybe a playoff berth in NBL 25.
We will get into their prospects for NBL 25 a bit later in the show, but first we want to look at player movement. So quite a big list change this season for Cairns. Lost a heap of guys, as you touched on a bit there, Taj McCall, Bull Cole, Sam Menenga, Latmine. But I want to start off with you, Josh. The biggest loss for this team from NBL 24 moving into this season, who would you say the biggest loss for this team is?
Yeah, I think the biggest one's got to be Tajir McCall now. He's a guy who was a sort of MVP caliber player in the league, and that term does get thrown around quite a bit by myself. But, you look at this guy, he's a guy who was a triple-double threat, double-double threat most nights. We didn't see the best of him until midway through the NBL 24 season, where he really started to shine for this team. And you saw some wins on the board as well for this team really starting to fly through as well. And, obviously we talked about some of the bad things in terms of the off-court stuff, but on-court, he was a major, major reason as to why a lot of these players were playing great basketball. And, he was a really good person who would be really good in the pick and roll. You'd be able to see a guy like Sam Menenga or Sam Wardenberg who would typically pop. They would work really well with Tajir McCall. And then a guy like Josh Roberts as well, who I guess struggled a little bit at times, in those rotations as well. We really got to see the best of Josh Roberts when Tajir McCall was on the floor as well, because he's just an outstanding playmaker. And, he was just, I guess, the most probably complete player for the Cairns Taipans last season, and it's a massive shame that we won't be seeing him in NBL25 at any capacity between any team in the NBL, because he was one of my personal favourites, and I know a lot of people really had a soft spot for Tajir McCall as well, because I think a lot of people look at the Cairns Taipans as, I guess, a struggling franchise who are a bunch of battlers up there trying to figure out what the hell they're doing, but we saw a guy who stuck fat with the Cairns Taipans for multiple seasons, and obviously walks away in NBL25, which is sad for them.
And Jez, your biggest kind of takeaway, or who are they going to miss the most from your perspective into this coming season?
I think 100% Patrick Miller. He was quite a surprise packet come in as like a key import signing, and he showed up. So I was quite surprised that he didn't get another contract or didn't stay in Cairns or stay even in the NBL. He's moved over to like the Russian league now, I believe. So yeah, pretty crazy move considering the times. But like, he was 7th in scoring in the league. He was 3rd in assists. He played his role for Cairns. In my opinion, he could have definitely been a superstar of the league if he could just sort of settle into Australia, settle into the NBL. But they let him go, and yeah, he's moved on to bigger and better things where he is now. But yeah, he was definitely the biggest loss for me.
Yeah, and I just got something to add on Miller, Jez, as well. The reason, and the key reason, I guess, as to why he did sign with the Cairns Taipans was him and Tajir McCall are best friends from pretty much high school, and even, looking back to I guess, what we would call as primary school. But they've been mates for a long period of time. They frequently work out in off seasons as well. And yeah, I think obviously Tajir not coming back, I think really, I guess, soured potentially Patrick Miller's chances of coming back to the Cairns Taipans in NBL25. And yeah, you're spot on with everything you said, mate. Looking back to a game against the Melbourne United last season, I should say, he torched them. He had about just under 30 points and just over 10 assists, and him and Josh Roberts were, I guess, the most lethal 1-2 punch in a particular game that we saw last season. And he's going to be sorely missed as well, because he was brought in obviously to, I guess, help the development of Taron Armstrong, who is a young guard. And the original plan was obviously for Taron to be the starting point guard, and then Patrick Miller to come off the bench as a 6th man. But after a few games, you really saw what this muscly, huge, small man could do for the Cairns Taipans, and he was a great player and a massive loss for the Taipans.
Well, I think, part of what this team is about is getting that core together and looking forward. And I have something, when we get into their future for this upcoming season, I'm actually riding high on the Taipans this season, despite the losses they've had. But one of the losses I want to touch on, Bull Kuol, he, I think, will be a massive loss for this team. A very handy defender, a good 3-point shooter, and you see him now playing in the South Sudanese Olympic team, and they're tearing it up. Obviously, a loss just recently against Serbia knocked him out of the comp, but he was a very, very important part of that team. And to lose a guy of that caliber, especially if, coming back from that Olympic campaign and then coming back into the team, would have been amazing for this Cairns outfit. So I think that's going to be a pretty big loss for them as well. What do you reckon, Josh?
Yeah, definitely a massive loss. Like KD even said this a couple of days ago when Team USA took on Serbia, that this kid's going to go places because he's I guess, aggressive. He loves to shoot the basketball. But I think the biggest tenacity he's got is he's not afraid to spend his 40 minutes defending from the full court. We've seen him take on the likes of a Bryce Cotton. We've seen him take on the likes of a Jalen Adams. They're some of the top point guards, shooting guards in the league. And Bull Kuol, he's not afraid. Now, the only negative, obviously, with Kuol is the fact that he does pick up fouls very frequently, and it can rack them up very quickly as well. We've seen him in the first halves in some particular games have 3 or 4 fouls before even half-time, and has to sit the third quarter and comes in the last quarter and fouls himself out. So that's obviously the biggest development that he's got to do as a player. But, realistically, if your only thing that realistically you got to get better on is, I guess, stopping to foul, that you're doing pretty well, I guess, as an NBL player. But I just want to touch on another one that I think is a massive loss for the Cairns Taipans going forward, and that's Sam Menenga. Now, he come from Davidson University over there. Now, with the biggest name, I guess, over there would be Steph Curry, obviously coming from that college, and he's only second behind Steph Curry in 3-pointers made at Davidson, and he's a center. So you look at this guy as a massive threat with the pick and pop, and what he can do outside, he can also match inside as well. He is one of the bigger grown men in the NBL at his age. He's only 24 years of age. He's a guy who is a Kiwi-born player. So when we touch on Kiwis in general, they are some of the biggest human beings you'll ever meet in your life. And he's a guy who's not afraid to throw the weight around. And, I think the only reason that he really left the Cairns Taipans is for more consistent opportunity. And, like we've mentioned a couple of times now, the big man merry-go-round and from the 40 factory just wasn't working last season. It seemed to be like he was a guy who would particularly get some good games under his belt, but then would be benched the next game as well. And it was really weird. I don't know if it was training standards that was keeping him out of games at certain stages, because he'd go through a run with, either 2 or 3 double-doubles or close to double-double games, and then would spend the bench, for majority of the games after that. So it's really weird, obviously, to see, what's been going on behind the scenes. And one day it'd be great to know what actually did happen behind the scenes with Adam Ford in this particular season and so far. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting one as well. But Jez, have you got some thoughts on Sam Menenga?
Yeah, I just think exactly like you said, he was a little bit slowed down there, not getting the minutes or the consistent minutes. Yeah, and that obviously hurts. I think like we touched on it a little bit with a lot of players up there. It's I don't know, you're sort of be harsh on them because there wasn't any consistency in these big guys games, but it is tough when you're getting inconsistent minutes. So it's easy sort of to criticize, but when you're under the pump, obviously you're playing professional sport. If you're not getting the minutes, you then need to perform consistently to hold your spot and fight for your spot. But like we've mentioned, it's not easy to do that. And some people respond in that environment and some people don't respond. But maybe that's not the best way that they were, getting the most out of Sam Menenga. And now we'll see, moving back to his homeland in New Zealand, I think we'll probably see the best of Sam.
It will be very interesting for sure. And we can't talk about player movement without touching on Bobby Clintman. Obviously drafted to the Pistons, had a great introduction to the Summer League. Jez, what do you see? He's only there for a year, and they would have obviously thought about, okay, there's a very good chance he's going to be drafted, maybe not basing the game around him too much. But a guy of that caliber, you're going to feel that loss both in the locker room and on court. How do you feel that's going to work out for them?
Yeah, he is a big loss, and I think we obviously saw that. I don't know. Maybe I wasn't really expecting him to go that high in the draft. He'd had a really, really good season. I guess when I say that, I mean from the start of the season. But he played so well, and he fit in Cairns really, really well. He was very, very strong defensively, and he was still putting up some pretty decent numbers as well, like averaging close to 10 points a game, 5 rebounds a game. So he definitely did his job up there, and he definitely deserves his spot in Detroit. And you hope for Bobby that he gets some minutes there and can really sort of help lift the Detroit organization out of the massive hole that they're in right now in the NBA.
Yes. Josh, any other players you want to touch on before we move to the signings?
Yeah, the last one I want to touch on is a guy we spoke about in last episode. I'm not going to go into too much depth about him because if you want to hear more about what he's going to do this upcoming season for the Adelaide 36ers, you can in that episode. But that's Lat Main. I think he's a guy who's going to be missed by them. I think he's on the right trajectory, obviously, to, I guess, be a very solid player. And he may not be a superstar player, and I don't think he will be, but he's going to be a very solid player in the NBL. And he's a relatively good defender. He's not afraid to, obviously, go out there and throw a few shots up as well. And I think obviously he's a guy who 40 really loves. He really gave the time to Lat Main, and I think it's a bit of a tough one because obviously he's gone home for family reasons. But I think the backing that he got from Adam Ford, he may not get anywhere else. Obviously going back to Scott Ninez, who it has been reported will be very good with the younger guys. But I just think the way that Fordy gets around his players is very crucial, obviously, to their development. And I guess the sort of reason as to why some of these players do stay for a number of seasons as well. So it's going to be interesting to see what he can do in the NBL in the coming seasons. And I'm looking forward to seeing his development because he's one that I'm very keen on and I'm very excited to see what he can do.
Well, just on that kind of note, we now turn to look at the signings. And as you said, Fordy gets around his young players and is known for his developmental processes and management of young players. They've signed a whole raft of players into this NBL25 squad. I think there are quite a number of signings which fit into their game plan. And when I read quotes and interviews from 40 and from other media about why these players are signed and what they bring to the team, it gets me a little bit excited about the Taipans. And I think, if they can get it to work, they could have a really solid team here. Maybe no Bryce Cotton MVP superstar, but if you have a really solid team, I think there's an opportunity for them to go far this season. Josh, who do you think is the biggest signing that they have produced this offseason?
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting because they've signed 3 imports who I haven't really heard of myself. And sometimes you hear of imports that are coming in that you've potentially heard in the past. But for myself, I hadn't really heard of these guys. But the one I want to touch on is Rob Edwards. Now, doing a bit of research on him and sort of looking at what he's going to produce, it's exciting. He's been nicknamed the Microwave. That is a nickname that you would love to have anyone in the NBA or in basketball world in general. It means you're an absolute lockdown shooter who gets hot very regularly. And, I think it's something that they really do need. They've sort of been lacking that over the past couple of seasons. I guess like a designated scorer. Obviously, they've had guys like Bull Quall. They've had Lat Mayen. You could even chuck in a Patrick Miller to a certain extent. But they're not knockdown shooters or guys who you can throw the ball to and get a shot. So it's going to be exciting to see what he can do because he's a guy who shot 44% from the three-point line over his 2 seasons in the G League. Now, that's incredible. That's really up there as well. And obviously, we touched on the three-point line compared to from the NBA G League to the NBL. It's a little bit in as well. So sometimes there is a little bit of an adjustment. You obviously think, how is that even possible when the three-point line's shorter? They should be hitting them at a higher clip. But it is a bit of an adjustment because the courts are slightly smaller and all that sort of good stuff as well. But I'm looking forward to seeing what sort of he does for the Cairns Taipans because a guy like Taron Armstrong is really going to be complemented by a guy like Rob Edwards.
And Jez, Tanner Groves are signing for Cairns. What do you got to tell the guys, the boys about Tanner Groves?
Yeah, I think he's a perfect piece to their puzzle. He's big. If you sort of Google him a little bit, he looks like a bear. He's a beast. He's got a big hairy beard. He's like a lumberjack type of a fellow. And there's also nicknames thrown around about him called the Pitbull. He likes to work really hard down low, scores most of his points in the paint. And I think that's really, really important. You have to have that type of guy in the league. And it can really sort of change your game. If you have someone strong, big and physical down low, I really, really think that you can go places because he's been very, very strong sort of on the lob and you can put him down and set up screens and really sort of work off him. So he could be a guy that they could really base a lot of their offense around this year. And then he's also going to go out there and grab you a whole heap of rebounds as well, being that sort of beast down low. So I think he's played in a couple of different leagues around Europe and China. And sort of coming out of the Oklahoma Sooners, he's got good pedigree and he is going to have to obviously prove himself at the NBL level. But I think he is the type of guy that fits into this sort of defense first type of style that you need to have in the NBL. And he can certainly score. So if they find the right role for him and him be the center of their attack down low, then he can definitely fit in right there. So yeah, that's my guy.
Jez, do you think? Obviously, we've touched on it a few times in this episode so far, with obviously the forwards or the centre merry-go-round. Do you see him so far as the number one guy? Because 40's been very excited about him so far, and you don't come in with a couple of nicknames like the Pitbull, for example, Mr. Worldwide, without obviously being an established player. So, do you see him being, I guess, the number one guy?
Yeah, I think so. Number one guy at center. Because they had their problems, but they've cleaned out these guys that they were sort of umming and ahhing about. So if you take a step back and you think, okay, well, what is 40 thinking? He had these problems up front. He didn't obviously find anyone that in his brain could consistently play that role. So he chopped and changed and moved around, and then he's got rid of them. So for me, it's like, okay, well, Groves could be that guy. They're going to center everything around him. And then you're going to have Warneberg playing sort of on the wing and down low. You've got Gak as well that could definitely fit in, as the second guy and rotate around. And yeah, I think it'll get the most out of Warneberg. You'll get the most out of Groves. And then Gak should be there to come in and give this bear a rest.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because I think he's only 6'9" as well, and that's a pretty undersized center, I guess, in the NBL and in any league realistically as well. And yeah, I'm not sure how the rotation's going to go. I think Adam Ford really found a bit of a gem in Nicola Gack last season. So maybe the whole point of it is you put a Groves to the 4 and Nicola Gack at the 5, and you bring in Sam Wardenberg off the bench as well. He's been very banged up in the last couple of seasons. But yeah, you're spot on with everything, mate. And I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do because, yeah, again, doing a bit of research and even seeing him, the beard on the man is absolutely incredible. And the guy who's got some absolutely huge shoulders and some massive arms, he's going to dominate some people in the NBL next season.
Yeah, I hope he comes here with the beard. I hope he doesn't shave it off. Need a guy. There needs to be more beards. And Aaron Baines is gone, and it wasn't a very good beard anyway. So
it's going to be hot though up in Cairns with a full face of hair, mate. I think it's a humid, sweaty environment up there, and yeah, it's going to be pretty hectic.
It's good. Get it in the face and the eyes of the guys marking him. It should be an advantage.
Feels like you boys are just describing me. Now, Josh, Kyron Galloway seems to be brought into this team as a defensive presence. I got a quote here from 40 saying that the team struggled in rebounding and rim protection last season, especially in the pick and roll coverage, and that this recruitment was part of a plan to help fix that. How do you kind of see Kyron Galloway fitting into this team?
Yeah, I've been very high on Kyron. I think I spoke about him when we did our top 3 player movements. I think I had him, if I'm correct, as the 3rd best player movement in the NBL so far. So, you know, I had obviously the move of Derek Walton Jr. and Jordan Hunter up there. So that's how highly I rate this player. Now, it's going to be interesting again because he falls into that forward center position where the rotations have been not great in the past. And, you know, you look at a guy like Sam Menenga, for example, who's been, Sam Wardenberg, I should say, who's been mentioned a few times. He was sort of seen as the next best thing for the Cairns Taipans. A lot of people were sort of, he was putting on the same trajectory as a Keanu Pinder. Very different players, but obviously the same trajectory on obviously being a bench player to a role player to a starter to a star player. That was looking like the trajectory he was going in, but he really stagnated last season. So is Kyron the guy that potentially comes in? And like Jez is talking, Groves at the 5, Kyron would be the perfect 4. He would even be a great 5 as well. He's got the size. He's got the height. I just think he's a very, very underrated player in the NBL, and we're starting to see the best of him now. Now, this is his 3rd team. He started out at the New Zealand Breakers, obviously gone over and played for the Adelaide 36ers, and has now made his way up to Cairns. And I just think, obviously, the way that 40's already been talking about him, and like you mentioned there as well, he's excited, and it's a new toy that obviously 40 gets to figure out what he can do with it. And I'm looking forward to seeing what he does because he's a guy who showed a lot of promise last season. And when he got those minutes and when the increase in minutes happened, there was an increase in production as well for the 36ers and Galloway.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of there's a connection with him also up in North Queensland. His mum played WNBL for the Townsville Fire. He also played a bit of his NBL1 career in Mackay. So it could be a little bit of a homecoming for him, somewhere where he feels comfortable. Like, I'm not sure on the family situation, but it seems like obviously they have a connection up there in North Queensland. So it could be a bit of a homecoming in it. And sometimes that really helps players. You know, you come in, you're comfortable, you're outside of basketball environment is good. You can certainly produce much better on the court. So I think it could be a really, really good move for him. And we'll certainly see obviously how he fits in that rotation. But if he can perform early in the season, we could see quite a lot of Galloway, I reckon.
Guys, the final recruit locked into the team, Pedro Bradshaw. Any kind of news or thoughts around him? I'll throw to you, Josh, first.
Yeah, it's a bit of a different one. Obviously, it was their most recent, I guess you could say, import signing, and he just seems, I guess, be a successful person. I think it's his first season outside of the States as well, and he had a very successful high school career and college career as well. But besides that, I'm not too certain about what he is going to produce. I think in his last season at high school, he averaged 22.1 points per game and 11.2 rebounds, I think it was. So if that's the sort of caliber player they're going to get in over here, it's exciting. And I guess the similar sort of thread between all 3 of these imports is they're either first-time professionals or first-time out-of-the-state professionals as well, which is going to be interesting, obviously, going forward because, yeah, like we're talking about, Fordy's trying to build something over here, and if he can lock away a couple of these guys going forward in a smaller market, it's going to go a long way to obviously having a successful time in coming NBL seasons.
Yeah, I think it's pretty sort of tough with him. You purely, obviously, we don't know a lot about him, and you don't know why Fordy's brought him in, but Fordy's a smart guy, and you would suspect he's done his research. But he's been pretty inconsistent. His last season, I don't know, he was either really hot or really not. And that's a really sort of dangerous person to bring in and change environment, move to the other side of the world. So I'm a little bit worried personally about how he's going to perform. I think Cairns really need some consistent players that you know what you're going to get out of them night in, night out. Even if those numbers were a little bit lower, much nicer for them to know, okay, if he's going to put up, 10, 2 and 2, or is he going to put up 25 and 6, and then the next night back down to 2, 2 and 2. Like I don't know. I think it's a really, really dangerous signing, but you hope that he obviously finds his consistency and gives Cairns what they need, because he has some really massive games, has some really, really good games, but then he has some games where he just doesn't produce at all. So hopefully you get the consistency out of him, but we'll see how smart that signing is at the end of the season.
Yeah, and I saw something as well in an article I was reading, the fact that he's not afraid to be a very good defender. And someone even wrote and quoted in there, he's a defensive beast who's not afraid to pick up and harass opponents from the full court. So finally got that one out. But that sort of looks in line, obviously, with what they've lost with Bull Qual potentially as well. Now, obviously, if he can give that and maybe a little bit of scoring, it could be a good signing, because it looks like Rob Edwards is going to be, I guess, the consistent shooter, I guess, on the team. So I don't know. Is his role potentially coming off the bench? I see that more as a likely scenario currently right now with what they've obviously got on their team. And it could be exciting. But yeah, like you're saying, Jez, it's either going to be absolutely full throttle or it's going to be pretty disappointing for Pedro.
Okay, so we have looked at the players coming in and out, and we touched a little bit on how they were last season. But if we now look a little bit forward with that in kind of the rear view mirror, a little bit about what were their needs kind of coming out of NBL24 and what do they need to be successful in NBL25. Josh, I know you had a few thoughts about kind of what they needed to do to get to be a successful team in the next season.
Yeah, I think the biggest need that they've sort of wanted to fill, I guess, is a strong leader. And I think you lost that with Tajir McCall. And like we've mentioned, obviously you lose the off-field antics, off-court antics that he did produce every now and then. But the leadership qualities that he produced from his first moment in Cairns 3 years ago was really strong. And a lot of pressure is now going to be on Taran Armstrong, I guess, to fill that void, obviously being the point guard and I guess the guy who's been knighted as the leader and the future of the Cairns Taipans. So it's going to be interesting to see, obviously, how they fill that void and how Taran steps up. But I think another one as well, talking about Taran, is they need to get players and obviously good people who can complement Taran on and off the court. And that's mentors, but on the court, it's obviously, I guess, the biggest thing, shooting and scoring. So I think they've done quite well in that aspect. But yeah, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts, Jez, on some of their needs as well coming into the season.
Yeah, I think you're right. They're putting a lot of faith in Taran Armstrong, and even say earlier in the off season, you didn't know if Taran was going to come back or was he going to come and play and get some sort of contract overseas. So, but it obvious at the end of this sort of off season period now that we're moving in, he's a lock to play there. But it is sort of scary because he is a young player. You're putting a lot of faith in him, and if he has a good season this year, then all of a sudden he could be playing overseas and could be playing in either the G League, NBA. He's that sort of caliber player, and it is always the problem up in Cairns is they do all this development like we know, and then players move on to bigger and better things. But like this year, obviously, if we're focusing just on NBL25, it does look like they've put in some good pieces that can certainly work around Taran and build a team around him. They've got the big guy up front. They pulled in a couple of other shooters that can play on the wings and in the forward position. So we'll see. Hopefully, we get the best out of Taran Armstrong and we'll see him progress in his career. But so for me, I think they've done a good job. But it could be very short-lived once again for poor old Cairns up there.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly touch on Taran quickly as well, and something that you mentioned there before we obviously move on. But I think the lucky thing, I guess, for the Cairns Taipans is unless Taran signs a proper NBA deal, I don't think he'll leave, purely based around the fact that a lot of these players nowadays are really sitting back there, especially the Aussies, are sat back going, am I really going to develop or get extra development, I guess, going to the G League than what I will in the NBL? So they may go to the G League and play okay minutes and develop at a nice rate, but they're not going to have the same, I guess, family feel. They're not going to be close to home at all. And I guess a lot of these players are seeing that, hey, the NBL's a proper league now. It's a draftable league. It's a league that's gaining traction. So, yeah, you're spot on, obviously, with those thoughts. But unless it's an NBA deal, I don't see Taron going. And, like you mentioned, though, if he has a big season this year, he's a very similar player to Josh Giddey was when he was in the NBL. And, they got very similar numbers in that particular point of their time as well. So to see him obviously develop and continue to develop is going to be very interesting watch. But, I'm very excited to see what he can do for the Cairns Taipans this season.
Yeah, I think it's definitely... sorry, Ryan. I just think it is... definitely interesting to see how he goes playing that 100% number one role, and that is that because he was sort of a little bit in and out last year, and like we've mentioned, if he gets the minutes, gets the time, and has a huge year, it's definitely on the cards that he gets some sort of at least a two-way deal or something like that in the NBA. You would think.
Okay, I just wanted to touch on a couple of numbers that I found while looking at the Cairns Taipans, and I know that we'd spoken a little bit off air about the structure of the league and the spend and the small markets and the large markets, and I know, Josh, that you have kind of a thought about why Cairns are why they are. They're in a small market and they haven't spent much money, and just some numbers to kind of back that up. So last season we have a salary cap in the league. For you people that don't know, I was one of those that didn't really know about the salary cap amount. But the Cairns Taipans have last season used the least amount of their salary cap out of any of the teams. So only 1.64 million used, compared to the good old Perth Wildcats moneybags, 2.4, way into the luxury tax there. And then I thought about, okay, well, why do they have such a small spend compared to any other teams? And I started looking at their crowd numbers, and they're averaging, they're not so dissimilar to a number of teams. They're averaging around that 4,000 or 5,000. That's what the convention centre holds there in Cairns. But I'm interested, Josh, to hear your thoughts a little bit about this topic for Cairns in particular. How does this cap affect them, and is there anything they can do kind of right now to be able to spend more money?
I don't think you can do anything right now, because I feel like if they do something right now, it will handbrake obviously going forward, because you'd obviously want to spend the money and bring these guys over. And, you touch on the Perth Wildcats compared to them. You said 2.4, I think, for the Perth Wildcats. So it's an $800,000 difference between what the Cairns Taipans spent last season and what Perth spent. Now, Perth are obviously an established team in the league and have been around for over 30 years now. The Cairns Taipans, I believe, are only about 15 to 20 years old. I think they had a bit of a transitional period, I'm pretty sure, off the top of my head. So, they've had, I guess, a little bit less of a time to obviously build up, the money that they need to obviously continue going forward with some of these salaries, and obviously with the progression of salaries as well, with the everyday climate going forward. So it's going to be interesting to see how they do it, because I don't think they're ever going to have enough money in the short term to be able to pay these luxury taxes to obviously be able to bring some guys over on some massive deals. But they've got to be smart with how they do it. Now, you can obviously sign players to marquee signings. Now, you can sign them to, let's just say they sign a Taron Armstrong to $700,000 for this upcoming season. What that will do if they make him a marquee player is, on the salary cap, they will only see $250,000 on the salary cap. So basically, that extra money there is not on the salary cap, because that is the whole point about signing a marquee talent. So they'll have that extra money there to be able to play with, to be able to bring over some imports and some other players as well. So you've got to effectively use those sort of, I guess, strategies that the NBL have brought in to obviously be able to fairn up the competition, because it's not fair a Perth Wildcats having X amount of money, or a Melbourne United or a Sydney Kings who can go out there and overspend the salary cap and go into the luxury tax and not be really affected. So these obviously things have been brought in to obviously help out the Cairns Taipans, the Adelaide 36ers, even the Tasmanian Jack Jumpers when they first started. So it's been successful and it's worked well, but I think for the Cairns Taipans to continue, we've obviously got to look at what the Cairns Taipans are and where they are, and it's far north in Queensland. So, it's not a massive market. It's nothing compared to the Sydney Kings. There's nothing compared to Melbourne United. And you even see, obviously, with those massive teams like we've touched on, Sydney, Perth and Melbourne, the sister teams, I guess you could call them, for Sydney, and the Illawarra Hawks and the Southeast Melbourne Phoenix, they've never had enough money, obviously, to obviously rival what those other teams have done. And that's why they've always been a little bit of a little brother compared to those teams. And you look at Perth, they're the only team in the biggest state in Australia. So they've got money because they've got a massive fan base. You look at Cairns and all that sort of stuff as well. It's not massive. And, looking at a Cairns Taipans cost of a ticket compared to what you look at a Perth Wildcats ticket, you can go to a Cairns Taipans game about 20 rows off for $35. That is amazing value for what you get. You go to a Perth Wildcats game 20 rows off the seat, you're going to be looking at about $150 a ticket. So that's a massive difference as well. They're charging well and truly over, and their stadium can hold up to 13,000 people, whereas the Cairns Taipans are looking at about 5,000 to 6,000 at maximum capacity. So there's a lot of things that obviously come into it, and even look at something as simple as flights. Cairns is not really a direct flight to many states in Australia. You've got to fly to Brisbane to then fly to some of these states as well. So there's a lot of things obviously behind the scenes that when you do talk about them, it makes a little bit of sense. But, for the people out there who are listening to the podcast who are thinking, how's this even possible? There are a few little thoughts that I've got on obviously how that obviously works out.
Very interesting indeed. Now, we want to look at the off-season as a whole for this team, go through just quickly about kind of our general thoughts, and then we'll finish off by giving the team a grade. Jez, I'll throw to you first. We give Josh a bit of time to breathe. What are kind of your thoughts about their off-season in general as a team?
Well, I think they've gone out and got some pieces that they do need, and you have Armstrong playing as your number one guy. They brought in some shooters, and they brought in a big beastie bear to sit down the front and score some lobs and throw the ball in. So I think structurally they've done a great job, and obviously with the salary cap, the money that's been able to be spent on player recruitment, I think they've done a good job. So, ultimately, I could give them a grade of maybe a B minus, but I think it could easily, you could be proven very wrong, and it could go down to a D, or it could absolutely go up to a high A once the season gets going, because there is a bit of a clean out going on, and you're never really going to know how good it is or how bad it was until probably 10 games into the season, when a lot of this new structure and all these new players have had a chance to gel. So B minus for me at the moment, and I'll probably get an egg on the face at some stage through the season about that, I guess.
Josh, what are your reflections on the Cairns off-season?
Yeah, I think it's been a sneaky good off-season for the Cairns Taipans. Obviously lost a lot, but have gained some. I think they've still lost too much compared to what they've gotten back, and that's the reason why I've given them a B grade for this off-season so far. But I think the biggest thing they've done is they look like they've, I guess, sort of tried to help Taron Armstrong with his development, and obviously giving him some pieces for him to play with as well going forward in future seasons. Now, the biggest thing, as it always is for a small market team, is keeping these players for a long extended period of time, and hopefully some of these guys do decide to stick around, because the Cairns Taipan have been a team in the past where they've had a few players stick around for a couple of seasons. A guy like Scott Machado rings, I guess, the biggest name to have stuck around for a couple of seasons in the NBL for the Cairns Taipans. So I guess the biggest thing is obviously keeping them happy, winning games of basketball, letting Taron Armstrong develop going forward, and keeping a few of these big names as well, because they could be successful in a couple of seasons. And 40 is a great coach, and he'll figure this all out going forward.
Interesting. My grade for this team, I'm actually giving them an A minus. I'm high on these guys. I think the recruitment strategy sounds, in theory, extremely positive. I think the way that they're structuring up their team, and if they can nail it down, as I said earlier in the show, I think they can be much better than what they were last season. I probably don't see them as a contender for the championship, but I think any improvement in a team that, changes half their roster can be very positive, and they have a lot to build on for as we touched on, a small market team. Guys, any final thoughts on the Cairns Taipans before we wrap it all up? Nothing? Okay, well, thank you for hanging around with us today, listeners and viewers. Don't forget to check out the Basketball Fix on all the channels. We're on Instagram, Facebook, a website now with fantastic articles written by both Josh and Jez. You can look at previous years' information, look at the upcoming NBL25 season, and get into some player and NBL, what do you call them? Not stars. What's the word you use, boys? A profile. NBL profiles that we interview throughout the season. So hit us up on all those channels, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow and all. And we hope you have got your basketball kicks.
He's the biggest of them all. Step back, 4-3. Phoenix forced a turnover at halfway. Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Clock at 10. Adams the off balance.